Welcome back to the Smarter Marketer podcast, brought to you by Rocket Agency. I'm your host, James Lawrence. Welcome back to the Smarter Marketer podcast. I'm here today with Sachin Rajah. Sach, welcome back to the pod.
Thanks for having me back, James. Must have really impressed you.
But it's not about me; it's about the audience, and they've been clamoring to get you back by popular demand.
Nice. It's good to be back.
So, for those of you that haven't heard one of the episodes where Sach has been on previously, he's head of client services at Rocket, plays a pretty integral part to the work that we do with our clients. I think a big part of your role is overseeing how campaigns are working, ensuring clients are happy, they're getting the results that they need. So when I thought of this topic, I thought of yourself. And I guess the reality is that as much as we like to hold ourselves to a high standard and do awesome work for our clients, there comes times where the work we're doing isn't driving the result they need. You'll have campaigns that cease performing as you might want them to perform. And I thought today we'd try to give marketers an under the hood look at how you would go about approaching a situation like that. I think as a starting point, what's a good way for marketers to put some structure around how you might go about fixing a campaign that isn't performing how you want?
Yeah. A really good framework that I like to follow is the DREAM framework. So that stands for diagnose, research, enhance, allocate, and measure. And when you look at the diagnose aspect, you're really looking at performance issues through your analytics data and understanding where the problem lies. Then you go into R, you're looking at your research, so you're understanding audience behaviors, you're doing competitor research. You go into E then, and you're looking at enhancing. So you look at your ad content and your targeting. Then you go into A, and that's allocation. So am I allocating budget into the right areas, or even resources for that matter, if it's an SEO campaign? And then finally, M is measure. And when you're looking at measuring, you want to make sure that you are identifying the right metrics against your campaign objectives. So how are my lead generation campaigns going against CPL? How are my awareness campaigns performing against my reach objectives?
That's a really simple and handy reference.
And the first step that you want to go through is diagnosing what exactly the problem is. And to your question, some of the things that could be going wrong when a campaign is failing are things like poor targeting within your ad platforms, or it could be weak creative. So potentially your CTR could be falling short. It could be inefficient budget allocation. So perhaps there are campaigns that are doing really well, and those campaigns that are just not doing well might be, or potentially taking the lion's share of your budget. So it's just kind of optimizing where your budget is going. It could be other things like looking at your conversion rate. So how's your user experience? And then data, making sure that your data is being tracked correctly. And that is one of the biggest things that I see when we onboard new clients here at Rocket.
So how do you know? Because often clients will give us KPIs, which is we're happy to spend X amount of money as long as CPAs stay in this range, or growth looks like 20%, or whatever those things might be. Sometimes expectations are realistic, sometimes they're not. So how do we know, or how do you identify that something is failing or it's not driving the result that you need?
Yeah, so typically clients will give us a KPI to work towards. And so let's just say you've got a KPI of CPL. So you want to get leads through at $100 CPL as an example. So you want to be measuring your ad platform CPL against that KPI. You want to be measuring it against your historical data as well, looking at both month on month and year on year, definitely taking into consideration seasonality and any trends like that. So if you are a lead generation type business, you'd be looking at your main metric, which would be your CPL across all your paid channels. If you're looking at analyzing SEO as an example, then you'd be looking at things like your conversion rate.
And if one of your team comes across the agency floor and says, Sach, clients' results have tanked, or new clients just not happy with the way this particular campaign's performing, how do you go about putting some structure around that?
Yep. So the first thing that I do is I look at a performance tracker. And so that performance tracker will give me a top level overview of your key metrics. So if I'm analyzing a paid media client, I will look at things like your impressions, clicks, CPCs, your conversions, and your conversion rate. From there, I will assess everything at a campaign level. So I'm not digging too deep because I want to get a top level overview of where to pinpoint my attention, or what do I want to put my attention into? Because if we have things like Bing, you got Meta ads and Google ads, there's a lot of channels to cover there. So you want to get a top level overview of where you want to focus that attention. So once you have a look at things from a top level, so we're really in that diagnose phase. You're using tools like Google Analytics, you're using tools like Search Console, and you could even be in platform. So you could even be looking directly into Meta Ads Manager or Google Ads Manager. And you're assessing where CPLs are dramatically falling month on month or year on year at a campaign level. And so once you have understood which campaign across your marketing mix is contributing to the declining results, that's when you start to go into that next phase, which is that research phase. And that's the phase where you really dive deeper into your audience data and doing competitor research and things like that. But before you get to that stage, it's really important that you ensure that tracking is correct. Because like I said before, in too many instances, I see either we've got clients coming to us where they might be double counting conversions, or tracking could have completely fallen off for a key event on the landing page. Because if you have multiple people making changes to your website, it's very easy for something to break as well. So in the beginning, you want to make sure you get tracking right.
Yeah, and it's such a hard one, because I think my feeling on that would be that most marketers undervalue good tracking and good data, and most marketers would say that's not true, place a massive degree of importance in it. But from experience, looking at the types of data setups we inherit, what do you reckon? 95% of setups just manifestly wrong. Lots of things broken, events being completely not tracked when they should be. I think it's something that the Australian digital community generally doesn't do as well as abroad. And I don't think it's valued as much as it should. And obviously it's always been important, but it just feels even more so now, right? With the signals that we are sending to your Facebooks and your Googles based on conversion events, firing, etc. If you're feeding incorrect information to those platforms, you just have incredibly poor performance in campaigns, right?
That's right. And it's not that Australian marketers are doing anything wrong per se. It's that tracking is such a specialized skill, and it's very difficult to find, even when we're recruiting. Finding really good tracking specialists can be one of the hardest candidates to actually recruit and find good quality talent for.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I didn't mean that in a disparaging way. I think it's more just that I think often there's certain things in line items, in budget, which people are happy to sign off and put reasonable money into. But it just feels to me that tracking data is an afterthought, and it's pretty unsexy. And I get a Google Data Studio report each month, and it looks okay to me, but often we'll look under the hood and it's a dog's breakfast. And it's not just about having accurate data to rely on each month, but it's also the impact that data has on campaign performance now.
Exactly.
Which one?
And just to put that into a practical example, just imagine you have a really key important conversion event that is just not firing, and you're looking at conversions within platform, and one campaign is performing much, much better than the other. And you're then making a decision off that data to potentially funnel more budget into that campaign, when that campaign that's not doing so well could actually, in fact, be driving better quality conversions and a high quantity of conversions as well. So that's really how important tracking is. And I can't stress that enough.
Yeah, 100%. So maybe, Sach, if we jump in on the ad platform tips, first one we're talking about being considering your entire marketing funnel, and just the importance of that when looking at why a campaign might be failing.
Yep. And a very important point. you have your awareness, consideration, and decision stage, as we know. So for your awareness stage, if you've got campaigns at that stage of the funnel, you're really optimizing towards your reach and potential impressions. So if you're looking at that campaign and you're asking your agency, why am I just not getting leads from this campaign? That's because the objective of that campaign should be reaching the right people with the right message. The messaging should not be geared towards conversions.
Yeah, 100%. And it's so easy for particularly non-marketers, right, to look at 10 campaigns and 3 of them, the CPLs at, $5,000, and you're looking at other ones and the CPLs are at $80. Well, we'll keep putting cash into the one that's $80, and without actually realizing that those first 2 are display campaigns and programmatic and YouTube campaigns that are reaching a huge audience that was never aware of us and bringing people through. We had a really interesting one a few years back, which was we're doing work for a bricks and mortar furniture store, really expensive stuff, running digital for them for a long time, and basically turned off a lot of, at their request, we were very hesitant to do it, a lot of the campaigns with a much higher CPL. They were omnichannel, online retail and bricks and mortar. And after about a month, had the owner of the business call us and say, something's changed. No one coming into the store anymore. We realized that it was the top of the funnel campaigns, awareness campaigns that are actually driving people in store on Saturdays and Sundays. And as much as we try to talk about closing the loop and in-store visits being tracked correctly through GA, it was a classic example of not paying attention to the full marketing funnel when looking at why a particular campaign may be failing.
Yep. That's so true. And that's why when I do look at optimizing campaigns and making suggestions, sometimes I even say we should allocate a set amount of budget towards those top of funnel campaigns and then really look at your mid and bottom of funnel campaigns in isolation against that performance budget.
Yeah, 100%. And that's very in line with the long and the short of it. The idea that depending, on your business, 60-40% of your budget might be split between longer form marketing, which isn't, you're not judging that through things like CPL and conversion rate. You're judging that through things like you mentioned before, reach, impressions, those types of metrics. And if you conflate the two, you'll often have an issue with those bottom of the funnel campaigns just not performing as well as they should. The next one we had was consider changing the ad platform campaign objective.
Yeah. So with this one here, you could be looking at the way your account is structured. So you have your top of funnel campaigns, mid and bottom of funnel, and perhaps you could have instances where frequency might be too high. So you might be hitting people too many times with your top of funnel messaging and you're not bringing them through that journey through to your mid funnel messaging and your bottom of funnel messaging. So that's something that's really important to consider is the way your campaigns are structured and set up and the objectives that you're advertising to within those campaigns. But even the setting of the actual objective is really important within ad. Over the years, as Google and Meta and TikTok have proved in the way of AI and automation, I'm seeing that campaign objectives like PMAX as an example in Google Ads are performing much, much better than 6 months or 12 months ago when it was first introduced. And the more data that you give the platform, the better the results are. So that's also a really another important consideration is what campaign objectives are you using? Are you leveraging AI as much as possible? And are you giving the platforms enough data to work with them?
That kind of reinforces the importance of data. If you're leaning on something like PMAX and you're giving Google incomplete or inaccurate data, you're going to find you have complete rubbish coming back through, right?
That's it. So true. And also further to that point as well, you also got to consider, as an example, in Meta, if you're setting the campaign objective to lead generation, then Facebook is going to serve you ad to those people who are likely to convert. So you really want to make sure that what you select in platform is really matched with what your true objective is, not what you think is going to drive the best performance, because like I said before, the tools, the technology has gotten much better. even in the past, in the early days, I used to have campaigns on maximize clicks as an example for lead generation campaigns. And back then it was still very early days. And I did find some success
Mm.
in doing that, but has definitely changed.
The computers are now smarter than you, Sach.
I know.
And I think also what worked yesterday might not work today, right? I think that's the theme of all these things. If you've been running your Google Ads setup and then PMax comes on board and you haven't moved things over or haven't adopted new targeting capabilities in Meta or in TikTok or LinkedIn, probably inherently going to be falling behind, right?
Yep. And PMax is a good example of that. And even dynamic search ads is a good example of that within the Google ecosystem. As an example, you could have someone searching 1,000 different ways for your product. And if you are targeting them through a generic search campaign where you're relying on manually inputting phrase match keywords or exact match keywords, you could be potentially missing out on quality traffic that would actually be interested in your product. So that is coming back to leveraging AI through dynamic search ads, through PMax to reach those audiences who may be trying to find your product or service in a different way that you might not have thought of using your keyword research or data, your historical data.
And how do you, it was interesting. It was something that one of our paid search team members said at a staff meeting, probably a little while back now, or 12 months ago. And I've never thought of it this way, which was that search ads are decreasingly about the keyword and are increasingly about the audience, and almost making the point that audience targeting is more important now to the success of search ads than the keyword bidding that's going on. Would you agree with that? Or is that for certain clients, but not all? For someone that's been doing Google ads since the beginning of AdWord back in the early 2000s, it was felt like a real tipping point to me. But yeah, like I'd be keen to get your observations on that.
Yeah, that's a really important point. And it comes back to leveraging automation, because the automation is leveraging its behavioral signals. So if you think about Google and how much data it has on you, it knows the likelihood of you converting on a particular page based on your browsing history, perhaps based on your actual search terms that you're inputting into Google. So that's why it could be less about the actual search term and more about tapping into those other signals that Google has access to. Really key example here could be if you think about buying a TV and you think about a top of funnel search or a bottom of funnel search, I could be searching for best LED TV, and that would be a top to middle of funnel search query. Whereas if I search for a specific model, then of course that's going to be more so a bottom of funnel query where I'm ready to convert, I'm ready to buy that particular model. But Google would know based on my browsing history the likelihood of me converting regardless of that search term that I put in, because I could have just put in Sony TVs and I could be ready to make a purchasing decision.
Mm. Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? That the promise of search, which was always intent driven, keyword driven, they've looked exactly for your product or service, can now be overridden by other behavioral signals that Google has on us. Interesting. And I think it is worth, because I think we do have a lot of prospective clients that'll come to us with often really well structured Google Ads accounts, lots of thought put into campaigns, ad groups, etc. Lots of work with exact phrase and phrase match, having well considered how they feel about broad match, etc. But the performance isn't quite there where it once was. And I think that's often because the way to optimize within Google Ads now is not what it used to be. And that some of that stuff still matters incredibly. But you do have to, it's that blending now, isn't it, of how to introduce PMax and when to seed things over to automated bidding and when not to.
Yeah, and very timely. Actually, last week I was analyzing a campaign that we wanted better performance of. I wouldn't say that it was failing per se. And it's actually to that point, we were testing segmentation. And historically, segmentation has worked really well. So we had a really broad DSA campaign and we looked at that campaign and we took themes that were performing really well, and we segmented them into their own specific search campaign. But what we found when we did that was that performance actually had dropped, because when it was in the broader campaign and in a DSA campaign, we were leveraging more Google signals. We're giving the platform more freedom to reach different people based on our budget. Now we were going after essentially 9 or 10 out of 10 people who are searching that query, when in fact a large portion of those people weren't ready to transact.
Mm.
So we were really missing out on the efficiency there in leveraging Google's AI.
Yeah, it's interesting. Any other, before we move on, any other tips around platforms and how to get more out of the platforms themselves?
Yeah, in terms of the platforms, you really want to dive deep into audiences, as you were saying before. Can't stress enough how important audience targeting is. So if you've got, as an example, a YouTube campaign or a display campaign, or in your advertising in social or TikTok, you want to make sure that you're split testing different audiences as much as you possibly can, because you might have campaigns that are relying on, it could be contextual targeting, it could be you having to pre-select certain audiences. So that's scenarios where you really want to be split testing audiences as much as possible. And then moving down another layer is creative. You want to make sure that you're analyzing your CTR on different creatives. You want to make sure that you're testing different creatives and just really leveraging the tools and the functionality of platforms. So doing a lot of experiments in Google Ads and doing a lot of creative A/B tests in Meta.
Good insights, I reckon, into some of the more platform-driven factors that can lead to detrimental performance or improved performance. The next area we wanted to jump into is creative. The impact of your creative is the biggest lever you have to pull in terms of campaign effectiveness. I think, what would be some of your observations around the types of creative that have worked for your clients over the years, and I guess conversely, the types of creative that just simply don't?
Yeah, creative is so important, right? It's really that first interaction that a potential customer has with your brand. So really ensuring that you've got a compelling visual or message can capture attention immediately. And that's what you're really after here. You're after creative that has a really high engagement rate. So you want high quality creative. If you think about it, you're putting creative in front of users, and what your objective is to get them to either look at that creative and it be memorable. You want them to remember it, or you want them to click through on your ad and explore your product or services further. So looking at things like your CTR is really important when it comes to creative, and looking at practical in-platform metrics. You also want to be making sure you do look at reach as well, and making sure that before you make decisions on whether a piece of creative is good or not, that you have had a sufficient amount of reach before you get to that decision.
Fair comment. There's Sam, who's our creative director. She has I think, distinct resonance, I think, is a kind of phrase around what great creative traditionally has been. Someone, the leading creative director in big agency land back in the day, came up with that, and she has a variation of it, which is distinct resonance that compels. Just the idea that great creative is distinct, it resonates with the target audience, but then it also compels at some level to drive action that you want, which I think is a nice idea.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the point I was coming to before. You really want your creative to stand out from your competitors and spark some sort of emotion in them, to get them to remember your brand and get them to really consider what you're having to offer. And it just doesn't come down to messaging. Visuals is so important as well in order to spark that emotion.
That's right. And I think we presume that anyone listening, that your creative follows a style guide, that it's been professionally created, that it passes the kind of bell test, that it feels authentic, and that would the type of creative you're rolling out will depend so much on your brand, on the target market. There's certainly lots of incredible brands that have more cheap and cheerful feel, your Chemist Warehouse type space. Your luxury goods, you're going to have a different level of production value on your creative, but has to be appropriate for your target market, right?
And here you're analyzing performance metrics like CTR, what I mentioned earlier, conversion rates, and really identifying those best performing creatives. And taking it a step further, when it comes to in-platform, you really want to ensure that you nail personalization. So matching the right creative, the right messaging with the right audience is so important. You just don't want to create this really cool, sleek creative that's on brand, and then it's being scattered across all your different audiences. So that's where the intersection between creative and performance marketing comes into play, is really having your performance teams work with your creative and branding teams to get that personalization.
It feels that is the future, right? That is the direction of this space where the AI promise is that you'll have this hyper personalization at scale. And I think there's some truth to that. And I think there's some hyperbole around it, but it feels that having great data, and I'm not speaking around analytics and tracking, but having great customer data, having it really well segmented, having it in a platform like a HubSpot or a Salesforce or whatever it might be, will allow you at probably some point in the near future to be able to hyper personalize campaigns, creative content, particularly with the growth that we'll see in AI tools and technology.
Yeah, that's it. It's a good point.
Let's presume that we've got reasonable data, we're in platform, we're making some of those changes based on the factors that you went through earlier. You're assessing your creative, you're feeling that it's there or thereabouts. Conversions, like how do you actually, what are the types of things you're looking at if you feel that potentially a campaign is being let down by landing page experience, UX, CX?
Yeah. So this is where you want to look at what search terms are people typing in order to get to that landing page, or what creative are people seeing in order to get to that landing page. That's the first step. You got to understand a user's intent when they are on your landing page. And once you understand that and you're confident that you are driving the right traffic, that's when you take it a step further and you look at your on-page elements. So if you've got a tool like Hotjar, you can track heat maps, you can have screen recordings, and you can understand the user journey. You can also use tools like GA4 to build out your funnel so you can understand the entry pages and the exit pages and where people are dropping off. So are people dropping off on that first page? Are they accessing other pages and then dropping off? You also want to understand how long people are spending on a page as well. So those are the kind of metrics that will tell you what is actually going on.
We'll get asked all the time, what's a good conversion rate? How long is a good time on site? What's a good click-through rate? And all those things, I suspect, is that it depends, right? You can definitely get some benchmarking data based on industry, but how do you assess it? Like, how do you look at it and go, yeah, the issue here is the landing page environment, but potentially that landing page environment might be converting at a reasonable percentage, or are you very much just looking at guidelines and looking at benchmarking data to go, this is where the problem is?
You are definitely using benchmarking data, but you're also looking at your actual CPL as a leading indicator as well. Because as an example, I could have a campaign that's driving really high quality traffic bottom of the funnel versus another middle of funnel type campaign. And the middle of funnel type campaign could be inflating all my figures because I'm driving thousands and thousands of visitors that are not ready to convert. So that's why you've got to take that into consideration as well. You can't just say, all right, my conversion rate's 1%. That's terrible, because you've got to take into consideration the context. So it's understanding, number one, your benchmarks, and number two, your historical data and your other leading indicators as well to know if that is a good or bad conversion rate.
Any advice on where to look to try to find out whether your conversion rate's an acceptable one?
I would definitely look at benchmarking data, and there's lots of sources on the internet, on Google, that you can look for in terms of your specific industry. A lot of the stats are international based or US based, but you can use that as a guide if there is no Australian data. And you can also use some competitor research tools as well. So SEMrush is another good example though that you can use. But yeah, those would be the main tools.
If you're feeling that your landing page experience is your Achilles heel, what would be your kind of suggestions around improving that?
So first, once you've analyzed your behavioral metrics, you want to also do some competitor research as well. So understand what are your competitor landing pages looking like? And are you missing any key elements? So as an example, your competitors could be offering, if you're a software as a service customer, you could have a free demo that your competitors are offering that you're not offering. You could have someone offering a free trial and you're not offering a free trial. So there's all these other considerations that are at play here when you look at optimizing your landing page. So it's not just about, okay, are my CTA buttons in the right color, or is the structure of my landing page good? You also have to consider your offer and your messaging as well. So it's competitor research. It's then looking at things from a best practice CRO perspective. So that's when you then look at the structure of your page. Do I have my key call to actions above the fold? Do I have my key messages above the fold? And then look at the remaining structure and go from there.
I think it'd be good to share a story or two of a campaign performance that you have turned around, and maybe don't speak specifically to the brand, but maybe you could talk about category or type of business and what changes were made that then had performance turnaround.
Yeah. So I think it was towards the end of last year, a client came to us. They're in the B2B space, industrial type equipment, warehousing, and they do transact with customers online. So it is an e-commerce client for us. And we were engaged to manage their Google ads. Now, when they came to us, we had a few challenges to work with. The first one was we had conversions and e-commerce revenue double counting within the platform. That was the first thing that we had to resolve. The second thing that we had was campaigns were very limited in terms of the way that it was set up in the segmentation. And the third problem that we found was the feed was not optimized correctly. So when you're looking at Google Merchant Center, and if you're an e-commerce business, feed optimization is so important, really important. As an example, if you are running a sale and you don't have the right attributes listed in your feed, Google will not know it's on sale and it won't show that sale extension. So that's just an example of how important feed optimization can be, and it can also impact your visibility as well. So those were some of the challenges that we experienced when we onboarded this client, and how we turned around or improved performance dramatically was, number one, getting tracking sorted. So we were analyzing clean, correct data when we were making the right decisions. The second thing that we looked at was ensuring that the feed was optimized and that we had 100% visibility of all their products. The third thing that we did was we looked at segmentation and where the budget was being spent. So this is a large spending account. I'm talking 6 figures a month. And there were areas where there was a significant amount of budget being spent where it was just not contributing to a purchase. Now, what I said there is really important. Contributing to a purchase. When I looked at the conversion parts in GA4, and I look at attribution, and you can actually change between different attribution models, you can then start to understand what campaigns are actually driving that user towards a purchase. And so we used that information to really optimize those campaigns and pull budget away from what we knew was not performing well, and we put it into campaigns that were performing. And just some simple things like that can have a significant impact on your return on ad spend and your revenue.
And so in that kind of example, what sort of change in ROAS would you have had from making those kind of foundational changes, structural changes?
It's quite significant. So that one there, we had an increase of about 1.8 times. So it almost double the ROAS.
Kind of incredible, isn't it? The idea that if it's a 6-figure account, even if it's just bang on 100, that's 100K of media spend, you don't need to in order to double your ROAS.
It's massive.
Massive. Right? Otherwise, so fascinating stuff. Thanks so much for coming back onto the pod, and hope to have you back soon.
Thanks, James. Good to be back.